Something unusual is happening in the background of your life right now. For a long time, it felt like the universe kept placing weight on your shoulders. Responsibility after responsibility. Lessons that arrived without warning. And no matter how quietly you carried it, it never seemed to stop. That pressure wasn't random. There is a force in astrology known for doing exactly that. It doesn't rush to reward people. It doesn't rush to comfort them either. It simply watches who continues walking when the road becomes heavier than expected. Most people meet that pressure and walk away. But a few people stay. They stay through the slow seasons, through the periods where progress is invisible, through the quiet moments where it feels like nothing is changing at all. And those are the moments that matter most. Because the planet responsible for those tests almost never hands out rewards. It pushes people to grow, to mature, to develop a deeper backbone. It strips away shortcuts and exposes every weak foundation someone built their life on. That's why so many people experience it as pressure. But right now, something rare is unfolding. For a brief window, that same force that usually tests people is shifting its role. Instead of pressing harder, it's observing what survived the pressure. This is the moment when discipline finally intersects with recognition. The Venus-Saturn conjunction. Most people think of Venus as something soft, relationships, affection, beauty, pleasure. And Saturn as the opposite, structure, accountability, hard lessons. But when these two forces stand side by side, something strange happens. Pressure meets value. And suddenly the universe begins evaluating what you stayed loyal to while no one was watching. This isn't about luck. It's about endurance. Because Saturn has been watching your patterns for a long time. It watched the moments when you chose responsibility over comfort. It watched when you remained patient while other people rushed ahead chasing quick rewards. It noticed when you continued building your life quietly instead of performing your progress for attention. Those moments seemed invisible at the time, but they weren't. Saturn doesn't respond to loud effort. It responds to consistent effort. And that's why this alignment doesn't affect everyone the same way. Some people will feel nothing. Others will feel resistance. But a small number of people will feel something entirely different. A shift. A subtle but unmistakable sense that something inside their life structure is finally unlocking. Not because things suddenly became easier, but because they stayed strong long enough for the pressure to transform them. Saturn rarely celebrates progress. But when it does, it only celebrates the kind that took time to build. And right now, it's paying attention to the ones who didn't quit when growth became quiet. There's a certain type of person this moment seems to notice. Not the loud ones. Not the ones who constantly announce their growth or display it for approval. The ones this alignment recognizes are usually the opposite. They're the people who kept evolving quietly. The ones who learned how to hold themselves together during periods when no one was offering encouragement. The ones who continued improving their habits, their boundaries, their thinking, even when nobody was watching. Integrity like that is difficult to fake. Because real integrity shows up in the smallest moments. It appears in the decisions you make when recognition isn't involved. When there's no applause waiting at the end. And those moments accumulate over time. You might not have realized it while it was happening. But every time you chose patience instead of reacting impulsively, something inside you strengthened. Every time you stayed committed to your responsibilities instead of abandoning them when things got frustrating, something inside you stabilized. Saturn notices those things. Not immediately, but eventually. That's the strange part about this influence. It doesn't respond to dramatic breakthroughs. It responds to quiet consistency. Which is why the people most affected by this conjunction often don't even realize they're the ones being recognized. They're too used to moving forward without validation. They're the dependable ones. The people who absorb pressure instead of projecting it onto everyone else. The ones who stay calm when situations become unstable. For a long time, that role may have felt exhausting. You might have wondered if anyone actually noticed how much discipline it took to remain steady while others around you drifted between chaos and comfort. And maybe the answer for a while was no. But Saturn's timing doesn't operate on human timelines. It operates on maturity. And maturity takes time to reveal itself. This is where the conjunction becomes personal. Because Venus begins highlighting something Saturn has been quietly observing, the quality of your character. Not the image you present, the structure beneath it. And when those two forces meet, something interesting happens. Value begins to rise toward the surface. Not external value first. Internal value. You begin noticing the strength you built without realizing it. You begin recognizing that your patience wasn't weakness. Your silence wasn't passivity. It was endurance. And endurance changes people. Slowly, quietly, but permanently. Then something even more subtle begins to change. Your tolerance. For a long time, you may have been the one who made space for everyone else. The one who listened longer than necessary, gave more than expected, and absorbed more pressure than people realized. It felt natural. You were the dependable one, the emotionally steady one. But during this alignment, something inside you begins recalculating what your time and attention are actually worth. Not in a dramatic way, in a precise way. You start noticing small things you used to ignore. Conversations that quietly drain you. Requests that always seem to arrive when someone else needs stability. You begin realizing something important. Your presence has value. And Saturn has a way of forcing that realization. Because Saturn understands something most people avoid thinking about. Everything has a cost. Your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth. For a long time, you may have spent those things freely. Answering every message. Returning every call. Showing up for people who rarely showed up the same way for you. Not because you were weak. Because you were capable. But capability doesn't mean unlimited access. And this is where the Venus-Saturn conjunction quietly begins adjusting your internal boundaries. You start responding a little slower. Not out of distance. Precision. You decline things that once felt automatic. You pause before saying yes. And the people around you may feel that shift immediately. Some will respect it. Others might feel confused. Because they were used to the old version of you, the one who gave without measuring the cost. But something inside you has matured. You're not pulling away from people. You're protecting the structure of your life. That difference matters. Saturn doesn't teach emotional coldness. It teaches clarity. The clarity that comes from recognizing that not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. And Venus adds another layer to that realization. It reminds you that your relationships, romantic, social, even professional, should reflect your value, not slowly diminish it. So the shift begins quietly. Fewer explanations. Stronger boundaries. Not distance. Alignment. Because when self-worth finally stabilizes, access to you stops being automatic. Around this time, something else becomes impossible to ignore. The difference between people who truly changed and people who only learned how to look like they changed. For a while, those two things can appear identical. Someone can talk about growth. They can repeat the right phrases. They can present an image that sounds thoughtful and self-aware. But Saturn has never been interested in appearances. It's interested in structure. And structure can't be faked for long. This is where the conjunction becomes quietly revealing. Because when pressure has been part of your life for a long time, it builds something inside you that performance cannot replicate. Depth. You don't just speak differently, you respond differently. You don't just talk about patience, you demonstrate it when things become inconvenient. Real growth shows up in behavior, not presentation. And Saturn has a way of exposing that distinction. You might start noticing it in subtle interactions. Someone who once sounded convincing suddenly feels inconsistent. A conversation that used to feel aligned now feels strangely hollow. Not because they changed, because your perception did. The pressure you moved through refined something inside you. It sharpened your ability to sense sincerity. And once that clarity appears, certain dynamics become difficult to ignore. People who perform growth often require attention to sustain the image. People who actually grow become quieter, more grounded, less interested in proving anything. That difference becomes unmistakable during this alignment. Because Venus begins highlighting authenticity in relationships. Who actually shows up consistently. Who respects your boundaries without resistance. And Saturn quietly filters everything else. This isn't about judging anyone. It's about recognition. Recognition that real transformation doesn't need to be displayed. It reveals itself naturally through stability, through accountability, through the calm confidence of someone who no longer needs to convince anyone that they've changed. And once you see that difference clearly, you can't unsee it. Pressure has a strange way of revealing people. Some collapse under it. Others start looking for exits the moment things become difficult. They step away from responsibility, convincing themselves that freedom means avoiding weight. But a few people do something different. They stay. Not because it's comfortable, because something inside them refuses to abandon what they committed to building. Saturn recognizes those people immediately, because Saturn was never trying to create strength in the first place. It was trying to reveal it. And that distinction matters. Strength isn't something that suddenly appears during easy seasons. It becomes visible when circumstances stop cooperating, when plans take longer than expected, when relationships require maturity instead of excitement, when progress slows down to a pace most people lose patience with. That's where real resilience shows itself. And if you've been moving through a season like that, you may have noticed something about yourself recently. You didn't break. You adjusted. Quietly. Responsibility didn't scare you away. It forced you to grow into someone more capable of carrying it. That realization can feel subtle at first, but it changes how you see yourself. You begin recognizing that the pressure you once resented was actually strengthening your foundation. It taught you how to make long-term decisions instead of chasing short-term relief. It showed you that commitment isn't a trap. It's a form of power. The ability to build something real. Relationships that last. Plans that don't collapse under stress. A life structure that holds steady when circumstances shift. Most people avoid that level of responsibility, because responsibility exposes who someone really is. But the ones who stayed with it discover something important. Pressure doesn't limit you. It clarifies you. It reveals the depth of patience you didn't know you possessed. The emotional endurance that only appears after you've faced difficult seasons and continued forward anyway. And once that strength becomes visible to you, something inside shifts. You stop doubting whether you can handle what's ahead. Because now you know. You already have. Then Venus steps forward and asks a quieter question. What do you actually want? Not what feels safe to want. Not what other people expect you to want. Your real desires. For a long time, many people slowly shrink their dreams without realizing it. They adjust their expectations to match what feels realistic, practical, acceptable. It happens gradually. You compromise a little here, lower a standard there, until eventually the life you're building starts reflecting safety more than truth. Venus has a way of exposing that. Because Venus doesn't deal with obligation. It deals with desire. And when it aligns with Saturn, something unusual happens. The desires you buried out of fear begin resurfacing. Not loudly, but clearly. You start noticing where you've been settling. Maybe in relationships that feel comfortable but not deeply aligned. Maybe in ambitions you quietly placed on hold because they felt too risky to pursue. Or maybe in small, everyday decisions where you chose stability over authenticity. This alignment begins illuminating those places. And that realization can feel uncomfortable at first. Because once you see where you lowered your standards, it becomes difficult to pretend you didn't. The mind begins asking questions. Why did I accept that? Why did I convince myself that was enough? But this isn't about regret. It's about clarity. Venus isn't exposing your true desires to create dissatisfaction. It's doing it so you can recognize what still matters to you, what still feels alive inside you. Because Saturn is standing right beside Venus during this moment. And Saturn only builds structures around things that are real. So, when your genuine desires resurface now, they don't feel like distant fantasies. They feel serious. Possible. Not because the world suddenly changed. Because your understanding of what you deserve has matured. And once that clarity appears, something subtle begins shifting. You stop negotiating with dreams that still belong to you. But desire alone has never been enough. Most people feel moments of inspiration. They imagine the life they want. They picture the relationship, the stability, the version of themselves that finally feels aligned. And for a brief moment it feels real. Then hesitation appears. Doubt begins negotiating with the vision. Practical concerns slowly shrink the idea until it becomes manageable again. That's why so many desires remain unfinished. Because desire without structure dissolves quickly. This is where Saturn enters the picture again. While Venus reveals what your heart actually wants, Saturn asks a different question. Are you willing to build it?
Not dream about it.
Build it.
Piece by piece.
Saturn understands that desire needs a container. Without discipline, even the strongest desire drifts into distraction. But when structure supports it, something powerful begins to happen.
Dreams stop feeling abstract.
They start becoming plans. You begin noticing small adjustments in how you approach your life. Your time becomes more intentional. Your priorities become clearer. You stop saying yes to things that quietly pull you away from what actually matters. Not because you're forcing yourself, because you finally understand the cost of misalignment. There's a quiet seriousness that appears during this phase. Not heaviness. Focus. You begin recognizing which limitations in your life are actually protective, the routines, boundaries, and commitments that keep your foundation strong. And you start questioning the ones that were never real to begin with. Old beliefs that said certain paths were impossible. Old fears that convinced you to play smaller than you needed to. Saturn begins dismantling those illusions carefully. Not all limits are restrictions. Some are simply structures waiting to be rebuilt in a stronger way. And when desire finally meets discipline, something rare begins forming. Momentum that lasts. Not excitement that fades after a few weeks. Progress that continues quietly, steadily, long after the initial inspiration passes. That's the kind of momentum Saturn respects. Because it's the kind that creates a life that can actually hold what you've been wanting. And as this alignment reaches its final phase, something else begins happening behind the scenes. Closures. Not the dramatic kind people often expect. The quieter kind. You may notice certain dynamics slowly reaching their natural endpoint. Conversations becoming shorter. Connections that once felt constant now appearing less frequently. At first it might feel confusing. Nothing explosive happened. No argument. No obvious turning point. Just a quiet sense that something has finished its role in your life. That's how Saturn often works. It doesn't always end things with conflict. Sometimes it simply reveals that the purpose of a chapter has already been fulfilled. And once that realization settles in, holding on to it starts to feel unnatural. You might look at a relationship, a routine, or even a goal you once chased intensely and notice something surprising. The attachment isn't there anymore. Not resentment. Not regret. Completion. Venus adds a layer of emotional understanding to this process. Instead of feeling like something is being taken from you, it begins to feel like space is being created. Because Saturn doesn't close chapters to punish people. It closes them to protect the structure of what you're building next. Some cycles cannot continue if the future you're stepping into is meant to be stronger. Certain habits, certain dynamics, certain environments belong to an older version of you. And this alignment is quietly acknowledging that version has already evolved. The endings happening now may not look dramatic on the outside, but internally, something significant is settling into place. You're no longer trying to maintain everything you once carried. You're becoming selective, intentional, careful about what remains in your life moving forward. Because Saturn has a simple rule. Anything strong enough to last must be built on alignment. And this moment is less about losing chapters and more about recognizing that you're ready for the next one. If you feel that quiet sense of refinement happening inside you right now, write refined in the comments. Not as a trend, as a signal that you're no longer building your life the way you used to. Something about you has stabilized. Not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier. The same pressures that once felt overwhelming now feel different. You see them faster. You respond to them with more clarity. And the most noticeable change isn't outside you. It's inside the way you measure things.
Your time.
Your attention. Your relationships. What once felt acceptable now feels misaligned. What once felt distant now feels possible. That's what this moment was quietly preparing you for. The Venus-Saturn conjunction was never just about reward. It was about recognition. Recognition of the patience you practiced when growth was slow. Recognition of the discipline you carried when no one was validating the effort. Most people abandon the process before that recognition arrives. But some people stay long enough to feel the shift. They become more selective, more intentional, not colder, clearer. And that clarity begins shaping the next chapter of their life. Different decisions, different standards, different connections. Not because they're trying to prove something, but because they've finally understood their own value. So if you've felt that quiet shift happening inside you lately, the stronger boundaries, the clearer desires, the sense that certain chapters are naturally closing, then you're already moving with this alignment. Comment steady if you feel that shift. And if this message found you at the right moment, stay close to this space. Because the next few alignments are going to reveal something even deeper about the path you're stepping into.